Hey everyone, my name is Anna Gogo, founder of Black Pod Collective and Black Pod Fest. I will be your moderator today, and I'm super excited to be here with these amazing people on this panel. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over so that way they can tell you a little bit about themselves as well as what they do. So I'm going to kick it on off to Anthony.
Oh, thank you so much for, moderating this great panel. Great thanks to Talib and Latrice for the invite to speak. My name's Anthony Frazier. I'm the CEO and founder of ABF Creative. We are a multicultural podcast network based in Newark, New Jersey. About 2 years in, we develop all multicultural podcasts and audiobooks. So I'm excited to contribute to this conversation today, and hopefully there's some value that you can get from it.
I guess I'll pick it up from Anthony there. My name is Chris Colbert. I'm the CEO, founder of DCP Entertainment. Much like Anthony, we've been around for a couple years now. We do what I like to call underrepresented conversations and communities, where we talk on the conversation side around things like mental health, overcoming adversity. But on that community side, people of color, women, LGBTQ plus, people with disability, essentially people, that are in the media landscape that are not getting the proper representation, are not getting the proper kind of resources. And so as a company, we try to provide that with our podcast and video content. And we have a lot of great Black voices that you see regularly on MSNBC, like Touré and Danielle Moody and Reverend Mark Thompson. So yeah, happy to be part of this this amazing panel to be able to, hopefully, teach you a little bit more about some of the lessons that we've learned.
Awesome. So I guess I'll take it from there. Hey everybody, happy Sunday. Just last minute shout out to all of you all for hanging in there and being here for the past 2 days, to Ta and to Latrice and to everybody on the panel. My name is Tiffany Ashite. I am an executive producer, most recently executive producer over at Essence Podcast Network, where we've had a roster of shows, most popular one being Yes Girl Podcast, which is covering culture and entertainment. I have interviewed some of the biggest names in culture, entertainment, movies, and film. Some of the other podcasts that we do are all of them target Black women. So Unbossed, The Solve, which is a love and relationships podcast, and a gamut of others. So definitely go check them out when you can. And so, yeah, happy to be on this panel.
Well, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So happy to have everyone here. It seems like we have a slew of people who've joined, so I think it's good that we can go ahead and dive on in. So first and foremost on the docket, just to give you guys a little overview, we're gonna really be diving into just the full gambit of it, from where podcast industry is today, where the panelists see it going to in the future, independent podcasts, advice, just the whole full representation, the full gambit. So first and foremost, where would you guys say that you think the podcast industry was 5 years ago? And what have you seen good changes for our community? And what are areas that we can still have areas of opportunity?
Cool, I guess I'll start it off. 5 years ago, to me, I think the podcast, and this is all from my personal perspective, to me, 5 years ago, I think it was more of an independent scene, very, very art focused, very focused on your interests. And we still have that today. But I think the difference between 5 years ago and today is corporate America has found its way into the podcast scene. More money is flowing into the podcast scene. More investment dollars are flowing into the podcast scene, and I think that that's a good thing on some levels. But also it can be, I would say, a glass wall or a glass ceiling in other ways for people looking to grow inside the medium, and so. That's why I see it, but I still think it's relatively a young industry. Every day I read a thought piece about how Clubhouse is ending podcasts, or some new thing, or podcasts. And look, I feel like podcast is much like email. I compare the two. Email people have been saying email is going to end any day now. I'm still waiting, and I think podcast isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, I think Anthony's absolutely right there. And I also think, especially in the, 5 years ago, you were really seeing a lot of, comedy and sports kind of podcasts, things that were, kind of low hanging fruit. And I think over these past 5 years, you've seen, people get more creative with how they're covering stories, what they're talking about. I think obviously there was that wave in the, I'll say documentary space, but more so like those investigative podcasts and a very white centric kind of focus on that. And I think now we're seeing more creativity from people of color getting into that space, but also then taking that to the next level with telling our own stories and telling it in an authentic way. I also think too, where the industry is starting to go, there are more of the scripted type of podcasts. And just to shout out Anthony again, he's doing some of that great work there. And I think that's a new wave where I'd like to see more people of color being able to put out content. But I also see this new wave, if you've been watching some of the industry news, places like Spotify and Apple are starting to experiment more with video. And so I think next year we're going to start seeing a lot more video content iterated within the podcast space. Now, I don't know exactly how that's going to flesh out, but I think we should all be prepared that that may be the case. And, with these smartphones we all have, we don't always need these professional 4K cameras because most of our phones are 4K and HD. So I think that's something that we should all be prepared for.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. But I would just add and emphasize the literal difference between then and now and tomorrow is just the diversity. I think that at the end of the day, Chris, you mentioned it being a very white space, and to an extent, it very still much is a very white space. You could count on one hand 5 years ago the popular quote unquote mainstream podcasts of color. You could literally count them on one hand, right? And so now here we are. There are lots of podcasts created by Black and Brown people, but as podcast popularity grows, as money starts to flow, the importance of really being more niche and serving your audience is the thing that's going to differentiate moving forward, hands down.
So brought up something that I definitely want to tap into, but before I go into that, as we're talking about where the industry is going to, what are you guys' thoughts around all these podcast networks that are popping up? Because it seems like podcast networks may be the new wave. What are your thoughts on that? We have a lot of celebrities kind of diving in that realm. Amanda Seales created a podcast network for comedy, I believe. Then you have Joe Budden, and then you have, Charlemagne. What are your thoughts on that for an independent podcaster? And then what about the longevity of what that really looks like?
Yeah, no, we definitely are seeing that. And, as someone who has a podcast company as well, who jumped in 2 years ago, it's encouraging to see that more people are jumping in, but it is scary because these people have deeper pockets if they're celebrities and they already have a built-in audience base. But I also think podcasting also is very collaborative in terms of it's an on-demand platform. So just because Joe Budden has a new podcast network doesn't mean people aren't going to listen to your podcast. So first, see if there are ways that you can, maybe, and these are kind of pie in the sky kind of thoughts too, but can you partner with him or try to get your promo on his show or, Tiffany Haddish or wherever it may be. Again, maybe kind of tough, but also then understanding, okay, what are they bringing to the table? They have a niche that they're serving, probably more comedy based or more music based. Okay, what is your avenue? Are you dealing in a space that they are not speaking to? And then truly own that. And remember that just because they're getting millions of downloads doesn't mean that you can not. Just because you're getting 1,000 and they're getting 1,000,000 doesn't mean that you're not successful. Having a niche audience can also be lucrative in terms of understanding who that audience is and having an audience that is very loyal to you. So brands can still come to you to advertise if that's ultimately what you want to be able to do. So as you're seeing these other companies and other shows jump into the space, don't try to hold yourself up necessarily to their same standards in terms of how much of an audience they're bringing in. Remember that you have a niche and stay focused on that and build that.
Yeah, just to echo a little bit about what Chris is talking about, I have an independent network as well. And so, it's sort of just figuring out what makes you different from everyone else. It's like any small business, it's no different. Like, well, how are you going to, approach the marketplace and what's your unique selling, point versus them? And so, yeah, that's something that we have to think deep about. You can't, just you can't just have a lot of the same conversations. I think definitely cross promotion is a great thing, but you have to also focus on yourself. Like, what's your product? How does your sound different, in any other way? For example, us, Chris talked about it, focusing on scripted content, more evergreen storytelling. Those are things that we chose to focus on, not necessarily because we thought we were, at the first at least thought we were better than everyone, but we just made a conscious decision to say, this is where we're going to focus and get great at. And like Chris said, once we get great at that, people will know that's our brand. That's what we stand on. And people will come to us for that. And then brands that you want to sponsor you or, come to you for advertisement, they'll start to recognize that difference in your network and go to you for those stories. So that's something that we're living out today.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, look, you can look at cable television. There's a million cable television networks, right? Because there's one doesn't mean that there's not another. And so, running a podcast network that was focused on targeting Black women, we didn't necessarily say, okay, well, there's this network out here, there's that network out there, we can't do it. It's just really honing in on the community that you are talking to and really knowing what your strategy is for really creating a network. Like, don't just create a network because everybody else is creating a network, right? If you're creating a network, then you have a strategic plan for purpose and, of course, for profit. But really be thoughtful about what that is, and don't just do it because it's popular. I mean, when you're seeing celebrities get behind this right now, it's a very much follow the money, right? There's a lot of money flowing into it. There's a lot of notoriety flowing into it. So of course, celebrity is going to follow that. Time will tell who stays and who goes. But if you look at Joe Budden's network, and even if you look at Charlamagne's partnership with iHeart, if you looked at the press release for Charlamagne's partnership with iHeart, he brought in a bunch of independent podcasters. These were people who were already making money in podcasting that he had rapport with that are now going to fold into his network. So you could already see the strategy behind it, but it's definitely not a deterrent for anyone who wants to do it.
So now that you guys have talked a lot about, really have people jumping into the network space is not competition. It doesn't really overshadow independent podcasters. But then the next question that I feel like a lot of independent podcasters have is around, what are the benefits of being in a network and what are the benefits of starting a network? So I know, Anthony, you indicated that you have a network. So could you quickly speak to that of what are those benefits? What are some of the pros, cons? I know there's various types of networks, but if you could just kind of dive into that a little bit.
I'll start with the pros. The pros are, you get to build an audience within, your own, suite of shows. Podcast discovery is increasingly difficult, and it's only going to get more difficult because anybody can start a podcast. And so there's a lot of competition. So, one of the benefits of having a network of shows is when you have a new show, you can introduce it in front of the audience of all the other shows that you have. And so it becomes a way for you to just kind of, rise with everyone together. And so that's one of the main benefits of having a network. Another is the combined listener count. When you're talking to, advertisers, brands, and you want them to advertise on your show, I don't just pitch one show. I have about 6, 7 that I can say are in one category. And so maybe we can combine those numbers, and then now we're a little bit more attractive to a brand or advertiser versus me just sending that one show, and that one show's numbers aren't strong enough. The cons are pretty much the same as the strengths, in the sense where, like, hey, getting attention is rough, and so how do you get that first influx of listeners into your network? That's been the biggest challenge, and so it takes a while. I think it takes a long time, and so you have to really what Tiffany said is really just have a plan for purpose and profit, and so and your purpose might be met before your profit is, and so you gotta plan for that long kind of road to profit and be very sustainable, be very smart on how you spend your money, if you plan to spend any money at all. And so that's just one, few things. So.
Yeah, Anthony basically hit on all the ones I was thinking about. So I'll just give it's kind of an add-on to one of the things he said in terms of having that network to be able to then, potentially bring in more advertising dollars because you have this suite of shows. But I think the same thing goes on the press and marketing side. When you have a brand that has this identity, and that identity is made up because of the various shows that you have, and that it all has some kind of tie to it. Obviously, every show is different, but you're servicing a certain kind of niche. So for us, that's what I call that underrepresented community. So when we're able to have that, we have a brand and identity that is easier to market on social media. It's easier now as people want to, write about us. And for us, one of the opportunities that came earlier this year was the new indie podcast upfronts called the X Fronts. We wouldn't have had that if we had only just had one or maybe even two shows. But because we had, 4, 5, 6 different shows and had some shows in the pipeline, they want to be able to service us as a show on their new upfront presentation, because that makes them look good because they're tied into the indie podcast community. But also now we're being put in front of new advertisers. We're being put in front of other podcasters who might want to be part of our network because now they understand our brand and say, I want to get on board of that train. And so I think that's the other thing. It also does help you from a marketing press standpoint.
I would just add to that. At the end of the day, building a network is not something that happens overnight. There's definitely benefits, and having that aggregated reach is definitely a huge, huge benefit. But at the end of the day, it takes time. And so the notion of rolling out a network with a roster of shows out the gate is not as realistic as building 1 or 2 shows, building that audience, nurturing that, seeing the growth, and then paving the way to then create additional shows. So super quick, when we started Essence Podcast Network, we already had one hugely successful show. And then based on that, based on the audience and the community and the engagement and the loyalty, we then rolled out a roster of additional shows and built a network on top of that. So I would just throw that in as a caveat for anyone who's thinking about it.
So I like what you said right there, Tiffany, because it sounds like it's about really building the foundation first, making sure you understand who your audience is so you know who to target, what they would be interested in, because I'm noticing some networks, all of the shows are in the same niche, whereas other networks have like a variety of shows on different topics. And so I guess it would be important to know, will your audience listen across, from show to show, or is there like a specific niche that they want to stay within? On that vein, you guys have each brought up the importance of niching down in essence. And what does that look like? So I know as the industry continues to grow, we hear a lot of things about niche podcasts are going to be really the $1 million podcast. But what are some categories that we're either our community is not being seen in, or we're not niching down enough in? Because I know I always say sex and relationship, everybody can't, there's only but so much you can talk about there. But that seems to usually be the go-to, or just society and culture. So what are you guys' thoughts on that? And then what does that look like long-term wise in these different categories that we're just not showing up in?
And I guess I'll do the shameless plug here. I think for us, we've seen that niche being, the social activism. And we were doing that before, George Floyd and this new movement that we're seeing, or I don't want to call it new, but this renewed and spearheaded movement that we now have. And so that has actually worked in our advantage because we had established programs around it. But now we have a new program called Say Their Name, which is all about unarmed Black people being killed by police and in stand your ground states. And it was something we were working on in 2018. So again, we weren't just trying to take advantage of a situation. So it is very altruistic. We're not just trying to build our network and sensationalize these things. But that being said, in the way that we do it, we are handing the microphone over to people in the community to tell their own stories. And so I think that is where, we as a company are doing this, but I think I'd like to see more in the industry is handing the microphone over to our community to give these real personal experiences of what they're experiencing, because no one's gonna be able to tell that story better than they will. And I also think that's the beauty of being an independent podcaster versus, say, a celebrity, because the celebrity, whether they try to or not, it becomes about them. as us as independents, we can really hand that microphone over, and people aren't coming to the Say Their Name podcast because of Chris Colbert. No, they're coming because of these individuals who have been put in these horrible situations. And so, I think we just have a unique ability to truly be able to help people tell their story and hand our platform over to them. So yeah, I think that's one of the ways and one of the niches that I think other people can get into.
One of the other niches that, shout out to Say Their Names, by the way, incredible podcast. And we're actually cross promoting right now because I have a podcast called Through Her Eyes, which is about mothers who lost their sons to gun violence, telling their stories. But just to talk about a different niche that we discovered over the summer that is complete, like I would say totally underserved in the podcast market is children of color. And so right now we have 2 podcasts, 3 in development that are focused specifically on children of color, and that was something that, I think there's a huge opportunity in. We put it out not really knowing what to expect. We only put it out because everybody was quarantining at the time. So we created the podcast, African Folk Tales, just say, okay, here goes something that, we can give to parents for their children. And we had no idea what the response would be, and honestly, I never told anyone this, but that's my number 1 podcast, because there it is, like it just parents, children, everyone's just like flocking and really listening to that. And I think we need more voices of color, more podcast creators to start creating content for children of color, and as I would say there's a movement amongst parents now to get rid of screens for their children's entertainment. The screen is very, I would say, toxic now for a lot of children. So, there's a great opportunity to jump into that screen-free, entertainment. So.
No, I agree. It's funny you mentioned that because I was going to say learning podcasts is definitely something, a hole that hasn't been filled. And to that, there's not enough science, like specifically like in the STEM field, specifically talking about and like breaking down STEM and science and math and all those things. Because to your point, a lot of educational sources use podcasts. And we are just looking at it from like a strictly consumer, like individual basis, but there are a lot of like educational institutions that can pull value from podcasts. And so if you look at like who can benefit from your content, that's definitely one angle. I'm going to be a little selfish and say that one thing that I'm personally not seeing enough of is more biographical podcasts. Everyone on here has probably listened to at least one episode of Mogul and what they did in season 1 and even in season 2. Just imagine and think about all of the iconic people, living and deceased, whose story need to be told. And we're out here waiting for biopics for what? Outside still isn't even open yet. But I think there's a huge opportunity for more biographical podcasts. So, yeah.
So I want to stay on the niche portion just a little bit, and this could just be my own personal thing about it. How, in some instances, are we doing ourselves a disservice by not niching down a little bit more? I want us to kind of, if we can just dig into that a little bit, because I know oftentimes I always say, like, you find your niche and your audience will find you. So with that in mind, if we're too broad and we're just kind of talking about, there's so many podcasts that they'll say they talk about sex, relationship, culture, lifestyle, news. And it's like, okay, so basically you talk about everything, which to me, if you're talking about everything, you're really talking about nothing. My personal preference. So with that in mind, how can we do a better job? Because I know for a lot of people, podcasting can just be a form of, release. But for those who are really trying to take it serious and make sure they take their brand to that next level, how can they niche down and like things like fiction, narrative, like there's these other elements or drama. What are some things that you would advise for somebody to find their niche if they're not able to really determine that just yet?
I think it's just looking at I'm sorry, Anthony.
No, it was Tiffany. Go ahead, Chris.
Tiffany. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah, I think it's taking a look at your own life, and that's where that, we love using that term authenticity. I think it's coming from that first and just saying, okay, what am I most qualified to speak on and also most passionate about? And I think that's where you go first. And obviously you have lots of passions, so that's maybe why you may be doing something that's very broad. But that's where you then look at the credibility piece. Why would somebody come to you for advice around that certain subject? If you're a plumber, you should do a plumbing podcast. It may not sound sexy, but the fact is, if you really are mainly doing it because you want to try to make money, which many of us are, starting there will be a key area, because now you have advertisers who particularly want to service to other plumbers or to other people who want to understand how to do plumbing for themselves. So that's just one example, and not, again, a sexy example, but it's something where you take what you know and your credibility, and then that's why people are going to come to you.
Yeah, I would also add to that and say you got to do the work. And if there's something you're interested in, but you may not have the expertise in, then dig yourself into the community, right? So treat this the same way as if you were a screenwriter that had a concept for a show, and you needed to engross yourself in that world to learn a little more about it. There are sources like the Script Lab. There's definitely other communities where you can dig into specific niches and really figure out what the conversation is. Because here's the thing, if it doesn't parallel your personal experience, but you have an interest in it and you want to create it, then you still need to stay authentic. And the only way to stay authentic is to connect to the people who are living it or who can relate to it. And so you have to, in order to do that, you have to do the work. So it's really looking at what you either enjoy, or to Chris's point, what your experience is, and then seeing what the conversation is around it and how other people connect to it, and really digging into those communities to see what it is that they want to hear from. So.
Yeah, I think Tiffany and Chris covered much of this, but what I would add on, just from a business point of view, is when you don't niche down, you basically make it harder to monetize. We talked about traffic just now, right? And there are shows out there that are getting millions of listeners. There are shows out there getting tens of thousands of listeners, and some just getting, just 1,000, maybe even just 500, per episode, right? But if I have a show about pliers, I'm just making an example, like, if I'm a handyman and I want to talk about pliers, I can possibly get a manufacturer of pliers to pay me. And I can start to make money. It wouldn't even matter if I didn't get 10,000 views or 1 million views, because I was niche, because I was talking to a specific audience. Now I got a chance to monetize with manufacturers, advertisers, brands that only exist in that particular realm. I got hit up this past weekend. Somebody told me I was a nano influencer. I never heard of that before. It was like, yo, you a nano influencer, we want to send you something. I'm like, okay, I'll take it, but I'm not gonna turn it down. But I went and Googled. I was like, I don't know what it is. I think I should know these things. And it was just basically saying somebody who has like 1,000 followers in a specific category, in a specific niche, right? And they're now, big brands are now saying, wait, we don't want to go to the person who has 10 million people following them, who has no engagement whatsoever. I want to go to the person who has only 1,000 followers, but everybody listens to them, right? And so imagine creating a podcast where you are the authority in a certain topic. It don't matter if you ain't got millions of listeners. When you become an authority in a specific topic, even if you only have 1,000 or 500 people listening, but they all have money, they all gonna buy, they all gonna be engaged, they listen to you, they email you, they reply to you. That's worth more to a brand or advertiser than it is than somebody who has a 1 million followers with no engagement. So when you don't niche down, you kind of remove opportunities to specialize and really even make relationships that can help your brand grow. So I just think about that.
Those are some really great points. So just to piggyback with that, with Anthony, nano influencers are anybody with 500 to 5,000 followers. And so with nano influencers, there's a lot of people who technically you are a nano influencer, but because of the fact that you're a little too broad, it makes it very difficult to actually like figure out that brand to connect with, because you have just a little bit of everybody in your audience versus having, this is who my audience is, this is what they like. So I really love the fact that you brought that up. So we've talked through, where podcasting was 5 years ago. We've talked about, what's the trend right now. So it sounds like some of the big trends are networks, as well as making sure you're able to niche down your podcast so that way you can not only monetize, but also grow your audience. So let's go into talking about, independent podcasters. That's most of us who are here. Sometimes it sounds really sexy. It sounds really great because it's like, ooh, I want to be picked up by, like a Spotify or something like that. But we don't always recognize what goes into that. Like, it just sounds nice. But let's talk about the importance of keeping independence and some of the pros and cons to making it to the big times.
I feel like I'm in limbo a little bit because, I took a different route from most independent podcast networks. So I'm a little bit independent, and I may could be considered not so much independent. So we did go the VC route, in the sense that we did raise money from investors, but I own a majority of everything, and I own all the intellectual property. And I think that's the most important part when you're building an independent network, especially for a Black independent network. And so not everybody has that particular opportunity. And so, yeah, I think, what we just talked about before kind of comes into this conversation as well. Being able to make a business out of what you're doing, because if it's a hobby, first you have to decide, like, is this a hobby or is this something I really want to make a business out of? Once you make that decision, if it's going to be a hobby, then cool. Like, it's a hobby, we indie, we like that punk band that goes to bars and we just play, and we and everybody rock with us, we solid. But if you want to make a business, then you do have to think about that profitability plan and how you're going to get there. And I think definitely when we talked about niches and we talked about niching down, figuring out what your plan is, your strategy, your bedrock, I think those are important when you are an independent podcaster. I'm pretty sure there's a lot more to that, but I'll defer and let Chris and Tiffany add on to it.
Yeah, like Anthony, we're also, I guess, that hybrid kind of independent company where we did raise money to be able to get our network started. But I think being an independent, again, also owning your IP, I think is very important. But also it's great being independent because you don't have that parent company who's telling you what you can and cannot do. Especially, again, if you're trying to do meaningful work, it's beyond just the paycheck. Obviously, we're all for profit here. We want to make money, but, I think you have more control over your content when you are independent, which I think is great. The positive to being part of, say, a Spotify or Apple, have some kind of relationship there, is obviously marketability. We talked earlier about how hard it can be to get discovered. So when you have a platform like Spotify or Apple or, Stitcher, who is putting you on their featured page and things like that, and I think we're going to touch on some of that stuff later, that can be very beneficial to try to pull in some of their millions and millions of people who use their app on a regular basis. But there's other ways to still go about it, because there are smaller podcast hosting platforms like Pocket Cast and things like that, where you can use them to be able to promote your content. So though I say it's a positive to be part of a big platform like Spotify to be able to get that marketability, there are kind of other ways around it until maybe you grow large enough that they start noticing you, and maybe either want to bring you on board or want to promote you more because they want people who love your content to come to them. So, at the same time, you need to be building up your brand, building up your cachet, so that eventually these companies want to either, purchase you if that's your, what you want to do is eventually sell your podcast or sell your network. But yeah, if you want to build yourself up, become as attractive as possible. But again, I think we'll touch a little bit later in terms of some other ways that you can get your marketing done, even if you don't have those kind of relationships.
So I guess a couple of things. One, if for those who are interested, look, I look at this very much similar to the record industry. But even before that, the first thing is that understand that this is still a business and this is an industry. And so whether you want to be independent, again, Anthony said, if you just want to do this as a hobby and just, it's very cathartic and whoever listens, then that's all well and good. No one is forcing anyone's hand in this. But if this is something that you want to monetize and maybe just make this your sole revenue and just career profession, then that's fine. But understand that this is a business, this is an industry, and it's important to do the research and really look and see how these platforms, how these networks, even the smaller ones, are moving, and pay attention to what they're doing, what they're acquiring, who's acquiring them. And if you are pitching or are pitched by a network, know that if someone's coming to you, they're coming to you because you have something of value. Like, make sure you get a lawyer and you really think about the terms with which you want to associate with a network. Marketing is great, resources are great, sure, but this is still your content. This is something that you create. And if you create it and you go to a network, do you have the leeway to, after 2 years, go to another network, or do they own everything? These are questions that you have to ask, and these are things that you should think about if being with a network, any network, is on your vision goal or is on your vision list. Really think about what you want from them, because they know what they want from you if they're approaching you. So,
and I want to add on to that, because I think, making those relationships are important before you need them. I need to say that, because I think sometimes, it's really just, sometimes a lot of those things that happen behind the scenes are really just relationship-based things. There are a lot of people who got really good stats on their podcast, but they can't seem to get the door open either. So it's not necessarily just the numbers, even though the numbers can help. It's the relationships. Top of the year, the On Air Fest. I was there, in Brooklyn right before the world ended. And making friends, doing that type of thing, going to the podcast conferences, being in places like this. I would say you already kind of took the first step, to building those relationships. Really start networking with the individuals, not just on the stage, but the individuals who are in the audience with you. You never know. Like, I remember being at On Air Fest, and I met one of my business partners because he was sitting next to me. And we began a rapport, and then that allowed me to make some key relationships. So it's not always about who's on stage. It's really just being out there, making those relationships with the people that you want to be in the industry with, and organically letting those grow into the opportunities that you've been, looking for.
I also want to piggyback off of Tiffany too, because she brought up an excellent point in terms of contracts. Make sure you understand those terms and make sure you own your IP. Do not give away your intellectual property. Do not give away your show. They clearly are coming to you for a reason. They understand it's valuable, so you should understand how valuable it is as well. And I think, especially as people of color, we tend to get taken advantage of in those situations. I also think that's the beauty of also what Anthony was talking about in terms of networking, going to these podcast conventions. You'll meet more of these individuals who you can lean on. I can hit up Anthony and say, hey, I just got this offer. I'm getting, offered this amount. Have you seen an offer like this? Should I be accepting this amount? Should I accept these kind of terms? So the more you build up your the people within this industry who you can trust, the more people you can lean on to be able to ask, okay, does this seem right to you? And just back to the contract piece itself as well. I think the other thing you want to make sure you take a look at is, even if you are not giving away your IP, as Tiffany said, make sure that you understand how long that deal is. And you may not want to sign a 4-year deal. It may sound nice because, okay, I'm getting guaranteed money for the next 4 years, but just think about how much your show may grow in those 4 years. And if you're accepting a certain amount of money in a year or two, you may feel like that contract was undervalued. So, I think Tiffany brought up some really, really excellent points there.
So there's just one more thing I wanted. I just want to add one more quick thing. You can still, there are resources and companies out here that just work and focus on leveraging independent podcasts. So you can does it take money? Absolutely. Do you still need a budget? Absolutely. And so it really is important to know how much things cost, because you're not an island and you do need additional resources, but you don't always need a network to get you those resources. I just wanted to put that out there.
So you guys brought up some really great stuff, because as you guys were talking, just some things came to mind. Prime example, as you talked about, Chris, is looking at how long your contract is, because think about Joe Budden. When he first signed on with Spotify, his show wasn't doing the numbers that it ended up doing. And he really was the one who was able to help them get to that next level, which then turned to him feeling undervalued. But then we look on the other end where we have like the nod and what happened with Spotify, of not really having what seems like a clear contract of what they were able to do, and now the position that they're in. But then you have some successes, so not to say it's always bad. Therapy for Black Girls, who has been independent for so long, who recently just signed on with iHeart. So there's different avenues to it. And Therapy for Black Girls, she was doing amazing on her own. So it's just all about making sure knowing what your end goal is. That's what I hear you guys saying. You have to first know what your end goal is, know what your purpose is, know what you're trying to achieve with your show, and then you can start aligning with brands, aligning with networks, and based off of what works for you. So if they're coming to you, that means that they know you're a value, but it's important that you know what your value is and what you want from that relationship. So I feel like that's what I heard overall from the three of you. But along those lines, we're going to pivot into this next piece. So we've talked about, independent podcasters. We've talked about, owning your niche and everything like that. But let's go into this notion of partnerships. So Chris, you brought up a lot of really great things around partnerships and everything from Pocket Cast, so on and so forth. And Anthony, you talked about really how going to these events, meeting people. A lot of times I hear how monetization isn't really just from, just sending a cold pitch. It's usually from relationship building. And so let's go ahead and dive into how independent podcasters can build some of those relationships with these various brands, with these companies that sometimes you don't even know about. So let's kind of dive into where somebody can start and what advice you would have for anyone who's trying to kind of get their leg in the door.
Yeah, I'll start that off just since you had mentioned Pocket Cast, and I like shouting them out personally because they were one of the first people to really, as a whole organization, kind of take on a lot of our shows and put us in their featured sections and places where anybody who comes to their app will see us right there on the homepage. And that all came out of, and I think we're going to provide the resource to you as well, a nice link to be able to go to their newsletter. I signed up for their newsletter, and in every single monthly newsletter, they have about like 4 different curated lists, something for Halloween. Do you have a podcast about Halloween? Do you have a podcast about, women in politics? Because Kamala's now this first vice president. And so I think, being able to just reach out, as Anthony was saying before, reach out to different people, but also reach out to these different podcast hosting platforms. Even if to you they seem small, you got to start somewhere. And so not only, and I'll again just stick with podcasts, not only do they have that there, they also allow you to send them a curated list to say, I actually would like you to do a list around social activism. So I'm now going to put my, social activism podcast for Say Their Name in there, but now I'm also going to shout out Anthony's show. I'm going to bring Through Her Eyes, and put that in there as well. And I'm going to reach out to some other podcast networks and put that as part of my curated list. So now not only am I promoting myself within Pocket Cast, but I'm also promoting other networks. And now I'm developing a relationship with other networks who may want to help cross promote me. So it's not even just going to these podcast hosting platforms, also figure out how you can give back to other independent podcasters in that process. And then again, also there is Apple Podcasts, where it is a lot tougher, but they have a podcast promotion platform, which I believe we're also providing a link for. So there's various different ways you can do that, but also remember that behind all of that are people. There are individuals. And so even if you think Spotify or Apple is pie in the sky, remember that there's people there who have certain passions, and they may be passionate about your show. And you may get fortunate that maybe you're a small show, but that person loves your show so much that they're going to make sure it gets on one of those big platforms. So just remember, it's still people behind all these different things.
I would add to that. You're absolutely right, Chris. And I would add to that. So yesterday, Ayana and I had mentioned the fact that a lot of these platforms are starting to have editorial teams. So aside from the people who are just running like the mechanics, logistics, operations, there are editorial teams. But the problem is these editorial teams are lean, and these editorial teams don't typically look like us. And so, even though it is their job to curate and to receive the pitches, they don't always know the thing that would connect to our audience, for example. So they're responsible for curating editorial content and pushing out podcasts that touch different topics, right? So obviously election is popular, and then the holidays are popular, and then whatever mainstream thing is popular. And then typically as podcasts of color, our complaint is that we only get showcased during what? February for Black History Month, or September, October for, Hispanic Heritage Month and that sort of thing. And there are many other times that we should be highlighted because of our content. This is the opportunity to bring that to their radar. So again, I'm going to say this over and over again. You're going to have to do the work. Get on LinkedIn and see who runs editorial over at Apple Podcasts, who does editorial over at Spotify. I'm not saying that they're necessarily going to answer your first message, but once you have a name, then that's a start. And then from there, really be serious. If you want to pitch them your show, then make it timely, right? Like June, everyone was talking about Juneteenth like it hadn't existed for a bunch of years. But if you had a show that was positioned or was talking about the history of Juneteenth, you could reach out to Apple Podcasts and be like, hey, everyone's talking about this. Our show covers this. Can you highlight us? Because we did that. And they were scrambling to find content for Juneteenth. And I literally pitched us and 2 other shows that were doing content, and we all got featured. But you have to think outside of what typically gets promoted and really think about what and how you want to pitch your show, and do the work and find the names to target them.
So I love what you just said around find the names, because there are a few comments in here asking about how do you go about that. So I know you talked about LinkedIn. I know I use LinkedIn as if it's my search directory at this point, because most times if somebody works somewhere, they're going to indicate what their title is. And if they're not the exact person, where I've gotten lucky is they're like, oh, great pitch. I'm not the person, but I'll be happy to send it to the right person. And then you've built this relationship. But if you guys have any other avenues that people can utilize outside of LinkedIn, I know, Chris, you talked about a newsletter, and that's how you were able to get in contact. I know a lot of people utilize Twitter, but if there's other avenues, please share, because the audience wants to know.
Well, I can talk about one avenue, because I wanted to definitely answer that previous question. As far as editorial, one trick that I think you can use for editorial that we've used is go look up the holidays list for all the world holidays. How you be seeing them silly holidays on Twitter, like Siblings Day and all of that. So just look for like that big giant list. And so when you pitching, find an angle, my show is about, look, gun violence awareness day is coming up. I got a podcast on gun violence. Let me angle my, whether the show is old or new. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about how new or old the content is. Just say, look, I got this podcast. This day is coming up. I think y'all should feature me because of this. Because you really have to, know what your angle is. And I'll just leave it at that. The other thing is, you have to think like a hacker in some ways. I come from the tech industry. That's my background. And so one of the ways I found out how to get a relationship, so I won't disclose who I got the company, but what I'll say is what I've done is, like, for instance, I'll apply for jobs. Like I went and applied for jobs at some of the top podcast companies out there. And I've always gotten to the last interview. And when 9 times out of 10, the person who's doing the last interview is the person I need to know. And I was never hired, but the relationship got built. So now we're still talking. We're still having that rapport. Matter of fact, they're still hooking me up in different ways, all because I just kind of found the way to get on the phone with them. And so it might not always work that way, but that's just a unique way that I've tried that worked for me. Definitely apply for those different jobs. And yeah, I'll leave it at there. I was going to talk about ads, but I'll leave it right there.
Anthony's about to have us with 5 jobs. Like we're to all the things. We're about to have 5 jobs, all the offers, and it's like I'm gonna figure it out. There's 24 hours in a day. I can do it.
I was going to also add on, I know we keep saying it, but it's the networking side of it, and not even just the networking in terms of just finding that person at an event, finding that editorial person at On Air Fest or Podcast Movement or something like that. It's also the networking that we're doing here. Reach out to each other to say, hey, do you have a contact at Apple? Do you have a contact at Spotify? And that's actually, I was looking for a contact at Spotify for 2 years. It took me 2 years to get that contact, but I finally got one. So, I think that's the other thing. Don't underestimate the power of the other people in your network.
Can I add one thing to that, Chris? When you do leverage your network, remember that it's a give-get. So maybe it's not just getting that contact, but it's also saying, okay, well, your podcast is about wellness. My podcast is about mental health. I know someone else whose podcast is about, whatever. Let's create our own kind of like clique, for lack of a better word, and then we can literally pitch together, right? When there are different opportunities that might touch all of our verticals or all of our categories, then why not pitch this together? And I keep throwing back the incident in Juneteenth. It's like they didn't necessarily have a contact at Apple, but I knew that there were 2 other shows that were doing things around the same topic that the platform had a need for. So it's all about the reciprocity. Don't just do it for you, but keep an idea of who's in your orbit, who you can keep continuously in your orbit. So if one is pitching on its behalf, they can pitch you as well. So.
And I actually love that you stated that, because it takes us into our next piece around collaboration. I think it's really important, like, especially as independent podcasters, but just as human beings, it's important to make sure that as you grow, you take people with you. I can honestly say, as a person building community within podcasting, there's quite a few of us. There's Latina podcasters, there's Asian American podcasters, there's women of color podcasters, and we do a really great job of, hey, this person reached out and they're doing a story about X, Y, and Z. I pitched you and was just like, hey, this might be a good person for you to reach out to. And so it's really talking about the ecosystem within podcasting and making sure that we're all helping each other however possible. But let's talk through how you go about that. I think sometimes people are always worried about it being one-sided, or, at times there's people who don't want to share like who the company is or who the contact is, because then there's this fear of, well, right now I have a relationship with them, they're helping me do X, Y, and Z. So let's talk through truly leveling the playing field and making sure as Black people, we truly come together and help each other out. So what type of advice would you have for anyone who is like, you know what, I want to network more, I want to build more relationships. They may not be as extroverted as me, but how can they start that conversation? Like I know sometimes I meet people and they're like, oh, I always wanted to DM you. And I was like, why didn't you? And so what are some things and some advice that you would have for people just as to like start off that conversation? Let's say even with you guys, like once we get off of this, if somebody's like, hey, Tiffany, the next time you're about to pitch something, I have this catalog, please don't, include me, those type of things.
Well, first, shout out to Black Pod Collective. I think what you're doing is one of those ways. And we're not, and that's unsolicited plug, because I'm not even technically part of Black Pod Collective. But what we do, we have Say Their Name, and so with Say Their Name, we that's something that myself and our chief content officer Adele Coleman, we run that show, and there's no other host, so it's easy for us to cross promote on that show ourselves. So we've now started doing what we call a Saturday shout out, where we'll take a trailer from another podcast and get their logo and get their description and drop it in our actual feed, so that we can now introduce our audience to this other podcast and also get you familiar with their branding. So, tons of podcasts out there have similar names. So you want to be able to know what it looks like, what to go find. So that's a new strategy we're trying. We don't fully know how much that'll work, but we're trying. I think it's also, if you have a newsletter or some kind of blog or something like that, that's another way to cross promote these other podcasters out there. And again, it doesn't take anything away from you. If anything, it's an added value for your audience, because you're now introducing them to podcasts they may love or other content they may love. So that's something that we're doing currently. But I know, again, Anthony is actually one of the people I've been cross promoting with. And, I know he has some strategies there too.
Yeah, as far as, on the collaboration front, Chris pretty much, hit it right on the head, just doing those cross promotion. I remember I asked one podcaster who had a lot of listeners. I was like, man, what's the magic pill that you got? What are you doing like to get something? He was like, man, truthfully, I'm just cross promoting with other podcasts. A lot of people thought it was like him buying ads or doing, nah, it's not really people don't, podcast listeners don't really trust ads, at least not web ads, but they'll trust a live read, from the host telling them like, hey, you should go check this other show out. It's really dope. So that's one way I feel like there could be a lot of collaboration as well. Another thing I would say is, it kind of touches on what Tiffany said earlier, which is the value of service, like, hooking people up. Like if you have other podcasts that fit in a certain realm and you feel like this is something that can benefit them, even if it doesn't benefit me directly, I'll make that link. I'll hook that up. I think that goes a long way. I don't want to get too spiritual, but I feel like building good karma is a big part of my success personally. So I feel like, being able to help other people in other ways, and hooking them up, I think that's a really big part of this.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%. It goes a long way, and you may not see the benefit. You may not see the benefit short term, and I think that's the one thing you have to remember. So collaboration it's not a short term thing; it's a long term thing. Because at the end of the day, you're still having to build a relationship with whether it's other podcasters, other producers, other platforms, other industry people. It starts with a hello, and it may not manifest into anything for a year and sometimes even 2 years, but that's not motivation to stop. And so even if you are introverted, you're going to have to put that aside and figure out what works best for you to build the relationship. You may not necessarily, go to a conference and then walk away with like 100 contacts. But if you are introverted, then you need to be more strategic, right? You need to identify who you want to talk to, why you want to talk to them, and figure out how you're going to build a relationship with them. And if even if it's 5 people instead of 100, those 5 people could manifest into something great. Also, following up and continuously letting people know what you're doing. That's how the relationship is being built. Like Anthony and I have worked together many, many times. After this, I'm going to stay on top of what Chris is doing, and he's going to stay on top of, I would hope he stay on top of what I'm doing, so that we don't leave this conversation with just knowing each other, being here for 45 minutes, an hour and a half, and then never talking to each other again. A relationship is built knowing what's constantly happening over and over and over again. So don't be shy to promote yourself and to promote your podcast and promote what's happening and how it's evolving and how it's changed. Just don't be shy about that, because closed mouths don't get fed.
Yeah, I want to add on to, I know Chris is about to jump in. Let me add on to that a little bit, because I was introverted. A lot of people, oh yeah, you ain't no introvert. Yeah, I'm definitely in the house. You know what I'm saying? Like that's me. And I'll be honest, like when I wasn't always at the conferences, etc., doing all those different things, I was like, yo, how am I going to get people to come to me? And it always was like, all right, I need to become magnetic in some kind of way. And the only way to do that is to become an authority in what it is that you do. That's why niching down is so important. Because when you become an authority in what it is that you're niche down in, people come to you. But if you're so widespread, people don't know that you're the expert in that particular thing. So you can attract all of that. You can attract all of that good energy, all of that good, all of those good hookups, not everything, but you can attract some of that if you really hunker down on what it is that's your niche and really just become an authority on it. Not just making podcasts, but maybe write a blog post, maybe do a video on YouTube about that particular topic. Start really hitting it from all different, mediums a little bit, and really become an authority in it. Put out some tweets, put some hashtags in there, all of that, and really just own what it is that you're talking about.
Yeah, I was mainly just jumping in to tell Tiffany that, yes, we will be in contact. But no, also, and it's been kind of touched on too, that altruisticness of also giving advice, especially as you grow and you learn more, give advice to other podcasters when you're at these other, at these conventions, or just as you meet with people. Because I think what comes out of that a lot of times is, now people are invested in you personally, and they want to see you succeed. They want to see your content succeed. So, even though, and I'll just speak to me as a network, like we can't take on every show, but I always try to have a meeting with every single person who wants to talk to me, because, hey, I might be able to give them some advice that takes them to the top. And who knows, they might surpass me and then reach back down and grab me and pull me back up with them. So I think the advice thing is something that you can give, as long as you're giving good advice. Don't just go giving out advice and all that, and you're not qualified to. But I think, again, as you grow in the industry, remember that your advice can also help you at some point.
I love all of that. To add to some of that, I would tell people, because in the chat, there's people going back and forth about social anxiety, being shy. Some people are shy extroverts, which I'm actually a shy extrovert. I know, sounds very strange. I actually used the first time I met Tiffany, it was at an Essence event that I was putting together. And like the whole day I wanted to meet her, and I was working the vendor area, but I just kept saying, okay, I'm going to figure out how to meet this woman. I want to meet her. I want to meet her. We were literally breaking down at this point. I had given up. I had said, I'm clearly not going to meet her. And then she's like standing over there. And I was like, I guess this is it. Now or never. Just go. And we've been in contact ever since. And so one thing I wanted to, like, she'll tell you, I was like sweating bullets. I was like,
I remember.
But one thing I want to say is, like, I believe in manifesting. So if I really feel like I manifested meeting this woman, because like everything I had set up to meet her, like I knew somebody who's interviewing with her, it got canceled. I was just like, Lord, you don't want this to happen for me. But what I will say to that is just making a plan. So if you are an introverted person, or some people have talked about needing to recharge, it can be very difficult to be in a setting where you're having to engage all day. So make the plan of like, okay, these are like 3 people that I want to meet. And not saying don't stalk them or anything like that, don't be socially awkward about it, but you can, join in on conversation with them. One thing I love about Whova is that I love Whova because of the fact that it lets you know who's coming to a session. It allows you to be like, ooh, this person is going to be at that session. I want to be at this session because I've been wanting to meet them. You can tell them about it later and you guys can laugh about it. Don't tell them when you first meet them. It might sound strange. So that's just something as an avenue for those who've brought that up. So let's talk about another thing about partnerships. So let's actually kind of dive into some advice, because I know I want to make sure we have enough time for questions and everything like that, because we have a few questions in the Q&A section. But what advice, because a lot of podcasters are usually struggling or needing assistance with discoverability, building their audience and engaging with their audience. Sometimes people are like, I have 200 followers, but I post a question and nobody responds. People like my stuff, but they don't actually talk to me. So first and foremost, what are some advice that you would give for people who are just looking for ways to stand out and be discovered?
I think with the engagement side of it, when you can make your audience feel like they're a part of the show, or they're even helping to lead what you're going to be doing. And I come from radio originally, and so I'm going to use a radio example. So when you listen to, a top 10 playlist where people are calling in and requesting, their favorite song, that playlist was already picked out. They're just picking the people who have said the songs that they want. So you can engage your audience and say, hey, help me, what should I talk about next week? You may already know your plan for the next 8 weeks, but it's that radio theater. It's let them feel like they help to choose it. Now, you can also do it from the very real perspective of find out what your audience wants to hear. And honestly, that is very valuable. Find out what they want to hear, and then you can help give that to them. Also, if you're going to be interviewing somebody, let them know, hey, I'm going to be interviewing somebody later today. This podcast comes out next week. You don't have to pretend like it's live or anything like that, but let them know I'm going to be talking to this person. Do you have any questions for them? And as you do the interview, shout them out. Again, it may have even been a question you were already going to ask, but shout out, at Chris Colbert, and, say this person had this question for you. And now as an audience member, I'm now engaged and felt like I was a part of your interview. And now I'm going to tell all my friends, hey, you need to listen. I asked this question. Listen to this amazing response that they gave. So I think that's one way to get to have engagement, and engagement that can create more followers, because people are now going to evangelize for you.
No, I agree. I would add to that. It's awkward for anybody that's putting their content out there, just kind of like waiting for the engagement. But as awkward as it is for you when you put your content out, imagine how awkward it is for like other podcasters. So I would pose the question to you: are you engaging with other podcasters' content? Because the more you engage with other people's content, they'll see that, and you'll start to come on their radar, so that when you put content out there, again, reciprocity, reciprocity, reciprocity. So I would just lean on not just worrying about your engagement, but maybe identifying 5 podcasters or 5 communities that are constantly putting content out there that you're going to support and engage with, and then allow the reciprocity to come in from there. On top of that, I would say that actually come back to me, because I want to get it together. Come back to me on that, because I do have something else, but come back.
Okay. Well, I'll add in, one thing, definitely what Chris and Tiffany have said, and I'll give an example of one of the ways we kind of found you got to kind of be a little bit creative when it comes to building an audience sometimes and getting some engagement. And one of the things we did when we first came out with Through Her Eyes, that podcast, was we started hitting up a lot of associations and gun violence nonprofits, and really just started making partnerships with them, and that's sort of like how we was able to be like, oh, okay, well, we'll could you send the email out about our podcast? A lot of those big organizations have email lists that are in the hundreds of thousands, and a lot of people don't know how to tap into them. They need content just like everybody else. What are they going to talk about in the next email blast? Well, I got something for them to talk about in the next few email blasts. So like, you can even bring them a campaign, that they can plug and play into their already kind of ecosystem, whatever they had going on with their editorial. That's one way you could leverage other audiences. The other thing is know what platform your audience loves to engage on. Funny enough, email is my biggest platform. Social media, we're very active on social media, but we rarely get listeners from social media at all, if at any. And so, you just got to know where, your listeners are really coming from, and just kind of double down on wherever channel or whatever medium that is.
So while Tiffany is, are you ready? Are you ready?
It came back. Yeah, it came back.
Okay.
So the other thing that I was going to say was, I was going to give an example of a campaign we created right at the top of the pandemic. So at the end of the day, the pandemic happened. 2020 is a shit show, we know. But what we realized was that a lot of Black women weren't being highlighted when they were talking about essential work. And so we literally reached out to people and just said, okay, well, how, again, our focus is Black women. How can we highlight Black women who are doing essential work? And so we created a whole campaign, had a special podcast series outside of what our podcast is about. We do culture and entertainment. Outside of that, we created a mini series specifically focused around essential workers and Black women, Black moms who were out here on the front lines. And we did it for 4 weeks. We tapped into just a gamut on social media as well as through our other channels, just tapped into women that were out here on the front lines of the pandemic, and we decided to interview some of them. We had 2 high-profile people, and then 4 just everyday, regular women like us. And because of that, that helped to, again, draw more attention. So some people who may not have cared about a conversation with Nia Long did care about this conversation with this doctor who works the emergency room at a hospital in New York. And so we were able to take the content, create a campaign about it, help make the guest ambassadors, and draw more attention for our show. So sometimes it's thinking outside of the content that you do on the regular and figure out how you can maybe create a mini series and figure out how you can create ambassadors that can then ride for your show. Because again, you've done something for them, and now they'll do something for you.
So to add to that, I think Anthony, you had made mention of this, but being on other people's email lists that's gold right there. Because of the mere fact that a lot of people, usually if a person has signed up for your email list, everybody who's listening, if you don't have an email list, start one today. But a person who signed up for your email list is going to be a lot more engaged because of the fact that they take the one step further to say they want to hear that. But like looking at meetups, Facebook groups, and reaching out and partnering with them. So those are all really great avenues. But some of the questions that we're seeing here around cross promoting, they want to know, like, when cross promoting, are you looking at being on other shows? And if so, how's the best way to like really pitch yourself to be on somebody's show?
I'd say the best way, and being on someone's show is very valuable because I think that is, and I'm forgetting the stats now, but it is one of the top 3 ways that people find podcasts is when they see the person, hear the person on somebody else's podcast, because now they're getting your voice, they're getting your perspective, and they're going to say, okay, I want to hear more of that on your program. The way you do it, though, is have other people on your podcast. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it. Reach out to others and have them as a guest on your show. And a lot of times, as we keep saying, and Tiffany, Anthony both said it, that reciprocity then happens. So I think that's probably the easiest way to do it. The other is, put together a what we call a one sheet. Okay, what is your value? What do you bring to the table? What specific things can you talk to? And not just in general. I think also think about, and you should be updating this on a regular basis, what topical, timely things can you touch on for why you need to be on now? And so, those are some of the things you can play around with. But again, I think the most valuable thing to do is if you have the ability to have someone as a guest on your show, and then hopefully they'll have you on theirs also.
Right. I think developing that one sheet is definitely important. And honestly, you can go look at, like, if you Google, I don't know if there's an example of the one sheet available, but even if you Google, speaker one sheet, like sometimes when you're a professional speaker, you have to develop a one sheet in order to get booked as a speaker. So like if you looked up what those look like, you can use those same exact one sheets to pitch yourself on different podcasts. We've even been approaching, I'm pretty sure something you guys might have seen, those like valet services where someone would kind of unbundle a PR package and they'll just do that one job, which is go pitch you to a bunch of podcasts to be a guest. If you got the money, do it. They are expensive. They do cost a lot of money, but they are effective. It basically allows you to do exactly what Chris said, except you don't have to do it. Somebody else will do it for you. So, if y'all got that kind of money, holla at me.
I would also say just be strategic with it. So a lot of times people pitch to be on other people's podcasts, because they have a lot of reach. But if you don't have anything to offer to their audience, don't waste your time and don't waste theirs. So it's more effective. Again, we're talking about niche. It's more effective to really be strategic about whose podcast you want to be on than just always going for the larger podcasts, the ones with the big numbers, because they're getting pitched every day, 20 times a day, right? But if you dig a little deeper and you see who aligns with your niche, who may be parallel to your niche, and target them and pitch them, they may not get as many pitches, right? So your angle may be something that's refreshing, that really will be of demand to their audience. So really, really be strategic. I feel like you should always have a one sheet and a deck. I don't care if you just started your podcast on Friday. That's on your homework list, a one sheet and a deck, period, because you never know when opportunity may strike. And so I would say, yeah, those are just the 2 things when it comes to being on other people's podcasts, and know what you have to offer. And going back to Chris, offering to have them on your podcast goes a long way too, because it's always about a give-get.
Yeah, I also want to I'm sorry. Okay. I also want to piggyback off that. Just like one of my biggest pet peeves when people pitch to us is one, the person they're pitching, as Tiffany said, has nothing to do with our show. So now I'm now mentally blocking you. I don't want to see any more emails from you. 2, they pitch and they just pitch themselves, but they don't mention what podcast they're pitching to. So we're a network. We have, 7 different podcasts that are out at any given time. So when you do that, I know you're actually not listening. I know that I'm just part of some mass email you sent out. So personalize your email, even if it's literally just changing one sentence. goes a long way. But I'm telling you again, just coming from somebody who is accepting pitches, I will mentally blackball you in my head of, okay, this person really doesn't care about what we're offering and who our audience is.
All right, so before I dive fully into just the questions, I want you guys to leave our audience with at least like 2 big pieces of advice that they can walk away with, and then we're going to dive into the Q&A section.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, think A to B, not A to Z. That's the biggest, you know, advice I would, that's one of the largest advice I give a lot of people. Sometimes, you know, it's very easy to get wrapped up in the end results, and what that looks like. And we want the end results yesterday. So you can't microwave success. And I think it's just really important that we recognize that. The other thing is, we talked about it earlier, and it's not, these aren't necessarily podcast tips, but we talked about it earlier about fear, anxiety, you know, going after these big opportunities, reaching out to that person you're super nervous about reaching out to, doing things like that. And one thing that's always gotten me over the hump is just using fear as motivation. So if you're not scared, then the opportunity isn't big enough, you know? So to me, I feel like using, you know, flipping fear on top of his head and just using that as motivation and say, yo, you know what? If I'm scared, then this is something I'm supposed to be doing, you know, versus the other way around. And so I think if you just approached all of these things that we're talking about today with that attitude of not thinking that the end result's gonna come tomorrow and then not letting fear stop you, I don't think that there's anything that you can't do within the podcast space. That's what I would leave with.
Yeah, mine are definitely reiterations of the things we talked about. But my 2 pieces of advice would be know your niche and understand, not to try to, well, not understand, do not hop on bandwagons. Do not just try to do the hot trend right now, because no one's going to notice you. You know, you don't have the same money that Spotify and Apple or iHeart or these big companies have. So think ahead, try to be strategic in terms of where is there a void? Where is my voice? Where is that authenticity that I come with? So the niche part is huge. The other is, as we've been saying, the networking. Do not undervalue that networking in terms of the information you're able to get, the relationships that network is able to then introduce you to. And as we've been saying, the reciprocity of that. Do not just look at that as you're taking. You should honestly, hopefully, be giving more than you're taking. So I think those are my 2 big ones to you know, impart on everybody.
Yeah, the biggest thing I would leave is don't create in a bubble. So understand a couple of things. One, that this is an industry, right? And understand that you're also building a community. So you're creating content, but the content you're creating is for an audience. And so just do not build this in a bubble, because if you build this in a bubble, you will succumb to what Anthony and Chris just mentioned. You'll succumb to the fear and you'll succumb to the trends. And so if you really pay attention to the audience that you're serving, to the community that you're serving, it will start to evolve, right? But also pay attention to the industry that this is servicing. Really, really pay attention. There are at least 20 different newsletters that are focused on the podcast industry. You should be subscribed to at least 5 of them, period. Because once you watch how the ecosystem moves, that will help you to sharpen and reinforce the goals that you really have for creating your podcast. And then the other thing that I would say is that this takes longer than you think. Every step of it. I mean, think about the process it takes for you to record and then edit and publish your show. Before you created a podcast, I bet you didn't realize how long that process took. Everything takes longer than you think. So don't beat yourself up if you're not where you want to be just yet.
I'm going to actually give some piece of advice. One being, be a part of community. Podcasting, and I know it sounds like a shameless plug. It doesn't have to be Black Pod Collective, but just be a part of community in general. One of the big things that I love about what we've been able to do is that if we see that you're not recording, you're not posting on social media, we're going to reach out to you. We're going to say, hey, are you okay? Do you need support? Do you need assistance? And so sometimes, especially for solo podcasters, you just need somebody who's able to check in on you. But also it's really great to have people to bounce things off of. As much as I'm building community, I also often rely on people who are also building community, because of the fact that they're the only ones who are going to understand some of my headaches some days. So that's the same notion for podcasters. Talking to your family members, the amount of times my mother does not understand what I'm doing baffles me. No matter how many times I've explained it, she just thinks I like to talk a lot, and she knows there's a microphone on my desk. So having the opportunity to lean on people who actually understand your frustrations, because everybody else in your life is probably not going to get it. Then the other piece is continuously being a learner. So with podcasting, it doesn't matter how many people I have helped, how many podcasts I've been on, how many podcasts I've done. On a daily basis, I'm learning something new. And that's what's going to help take your show further. That's what's going to take some of the frustrations off. That's going to help you kind of stay relevant and stay in the game and not burn out. Because those are the things where it's like, it allows you to continue to invest in yourself, invest in your show, and give yourself leeway for the fact that the show you started a year ago is not the same show you're going to have next year. And that's perfectly fine. So, with those pieces of advice, I'm going to first dive into the questions that are in the Q&A session I never know how to say this, Wova. Y'all know what I mean, the app that we are in right now. So we're going to first start off there. And then we're going to actually, if you raise your hand, we'll give you the opportunity to come up and ask your questions. Please make it short and sweet. If not, the first one will be the last one that we do that for. So make sure you're concise. You know, I know you might want to promote your show. Let's not do that. So let's just focus on the question. So first and foremost, our first question we have is, how have you managed getting fair compensation when dealing with corporations? Earning our worth seems to be a perpetual challenge compared to white content platforms. That was a mouthful.
I'll say one is, as I mentioned before, use your network to ask around what is fair. It is still a very new industry, regardless of black, white, what have you. So it's a new industry. The standards are constantly changing. So make sure you just have a strong network you can reach out to. The other is, don't be afraid to walk away. You have to hold the power of, I don't need you. And the second that they understand that you're basically waiting on them, they have all the power, and you are now just have no negotiation ability there. So you just have to understand your worth and understand that you might have to walk away from some deals.
Yeah, I second that. I definitely second that. Being able to walk away and having that ability is just so strong. And I second exactly. I was going to say the same exact thing. The moment I got a term sheet, offer letter, anything in that nature, I go straight to the lawyer. I go straight right away to the lawyer. Like, look, I don't understand this. Make it make sense to me. And I think another thing is, don't be afraid of of being ignorant to some of these things. I think sometimes, we don't want to look vulnerable. Look, I don't know how I got in this position either. So look, I'm just going to fake it. But I got to ask this person, because I ain't trying to end up in some kind of weird deal and somebody owns something. So I got to be very clear and speak to people in a very layman's way about what it is that I want and how can I get there. Because the selling is over, the marketing is over. Now it's time to really make the numbers and make the legalese make sense. So if there's something you don't understand, do not be nervous about reaching out to someone and saying, look, I do not understand this, because you don't want to end up in something that you might regret later.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would add to that, I would agree. A foolish person is the one that assumes they know everything. But on top of that, understanding the value of what you bring to the table sometimes is bigger than just your listenership. There are some people who also have communities elsewhere on other platforms. Understand what the ecosystem is of the community that you're creating, because all of that equates to value. And so everyone hears podcasts and they hear the popular term, but that doesn't mean that if they're approaching you with a check that they fully understand it. Sometimes you're going to have to educate them on the value that you're bringing and why you command a certain number. So.
Just to add to that, one of the big things I'll tell you is there's nothing wrong with just asking other people that you see have had ads on their shows. I always say, like, anybody who asks us for our ad rate sheet, I'll send it to you because why is there a secret? So just, I think sometimes we don't say things just because of the fact that it's like, it's uncomfortable, or it's like, well, I don't want them to feel like I'm overstepping. But this is why it's so important to have community. When you have that community, you don't even think twice about it. I know we have a few this does sound like a plug, but I'm just being honest. We have a few Black Pod Collective members here, and they often their contact information is on the directory. They'll usually just reach out to each other and be like, hey, I saw you did this. How did that work out? So on and so forth. That was a plug, wasn't it? I didn't mean it to be, though, just being honest. Okay, next question we have. So Tiffany, this was for you. I think you had brought this up, so they were asking about it. Who or what are the agencies that work with independent podcasts, like Tiffany describes? So I guess you were describing something earlier.
Yeah, so it will, of course, require, it will require money, or B, it's going to require a certain amount of listenership, but Cadence 13 and ACAST are two examples. Now, granted, at the end of the day, they are expecting a certain bar of listenership before they come in, but if you are an independent podcaster, I'm saying that those are two avenues that could potentially be partners in helping you get the resources that you can't necessarily do on your own. But that doesn't mean they're going to do the work for you. It means that you brought the podcast to a certain point, and now you're approaching them to help you get you to another level. So that's what I'm saying.
All right.
Does that answer it? I think.
So who asked that question? Lisa, did that answer your question? You can put it in the chat if it did. While you do that, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next question. And then if it didn't, we'll try to dive in a little bit more. Oh, this one is easy. So for those who are asking about any of the items, like throughout the conversation, if somebody was saying you can find the link. So on the app or even the desktop, if you go to the section that says handouts, there's a document that's a PDF file that says State of Black Podcast Resources. So it has links, it has a few different resources that the panelists put together. So for this question about anyone know where the URL for the Apple Podcast promotion link is, that information is in that document. So for anyone who is asking about any of the links that was referenced, that's in the handout section on the app as well as the desktop. And the document is called State of Black Podcast Resources. All right. Do you have recommendations for podcast industry newsletters that are relevant to Black podcasters specifically?
That's a good question. Whoever answers that, let me know.
Black Podcasters actually has a newsletter that's specific to Black podcasters.
So here's the gag, though. There's not, like, this list outside of Black Pod Collective and maybe one more. I'm not sure. Does Podcast in Color, do they have a news? I can't remember. Sometimes they do. It's like, it's not as frequent, as consistent.
Yeah.
Right. And so here's the gag, right? This is an opportunity, because there's literally, like, I literally have an article with 20 plus white podcast newsletters. We are scrambling to find 2 Black podcast newsletters. So I'm just saying that this could be an opportunity for somebody, and I'm gonna leave that right there.
So to add to that, go ahead, Chris.
Oh no, I was mine kind of is a pivot, so you go.
So what I'm going to say to that is it's twofold. as you guys know, we have a how-to podcast for podcasters. And because our whole platform is to podcasters, as we were looking at podcasts about podcasting, we didn't see anybody that looked like us. And so that's how we started the Black Pod Collective podcast. And we have so many people who come on to give you like actual tips and tricks to help you on your podcasting journey. Another thing that we're actually in the process of launching in partnership with Caribbean Podcast Directory is a Pod's Den, which is talking about like industry news, industry insights. So whereas Black Pod Collective, the podcast, is a how-to, really giving you tips, tricks, tools, we're going to be talking about like the news, the newest thing coming out, iHeartRadio partnerships, what this means for our community, those type of things. Of course, it's geared to every and anybody, but we're two Black women. We're also both foreigners. So we're going to be, of course, talking it from our lens, but also having people from the industry on the show because we recognize there's a gap in the industry. And we also have a newsletter. So our newsletter goes out bi-weekly. We're usually talking on the different topics that impact our community, but also we're talking about just some of the big news that's going on out there that you may just not have known about. Those that are not directly related to Black people, but it's still beneficial, would be Podcast Business Journal, Pod News. Pod News is my favorite. I just really, really like their content. But on top of that, Buzzsprout's newsletter is really robust. Like, it gives you a lot of tips and tricks. It has a lot of information. I'm fairly sure, you know, Lipson is the sponsor, so I'm fairly sure Lipson also has one. It's just that my podcast is with Buzzsprout, so I can't speak towards Lipson. So I wanted to say that because, you know, I want y'all to think this is Lipson's place. But no, go ahead, Chris.
Well, yeah, mine's kind of a slight pivot, but you know, as you guys were talking, I was reminded of something I forgot to mention earlier in terms of, especially if you're an editor, or you know, say you have a show, but you want to find an editor, a person of color. In our resources that we provided too, is, and I'm forgetting the exact name of it, but essentially it's, you know, a person of color directory for different producers or editors that you can find who are Black. So if you want to get on that list to try to get work, or if you're looking for somebody, that's another resource there that you can utilize.
I think it's called People of Color in Audio or something like that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. I actually hired a producer after that. So it does work. It works. Sign up.
Most definitely. Okay. So Lisa said that you answered the question, but I guess she didn't hear the full of what she said. So it was ACAST, Lisa, and Cadence 13. So ACAST. Okay, you got it. Perfect. All right. So next question is, are you cross-promoting by being a guest on other shows or doing a drop for other shows?
I think it's both. I think it's a combination of both, or either and or, you know, to be honest. But I think, you know, what Chris said is very important when he talked about something that is called in feed. And it's one thing to be a pre-roll, but it's another to actually be in the feed as well. So being in the feed is almost like sending an email out, you know, so everybody who's subscribed to that show will get the update, almost as if, you know, like they got a new email or a new episode of the podcast. That's a little bit more powerful than a pre-roll. And so that's something that I'm looking to do more of. And so, yeah, I would say just definitely explore any and everything. Nothing's off the table when it comes to cross promotion, because this is the Wild Wild West podcast. There's no standard right now for any of this. Everybody's still trying to figure it out. Even people who have, even on some of these big networks that you guys seeing, you'd be surprised behind the curtain. A lot of these people don't know what they're doing. They're riding off the popularity of their logo, and so it's really. Is still the Wild Wild West out here. So just try any and everything.
All right, last question in the Q&A, and then we'll open the floor up. We have a few more minutes. So should niche podcasts only go to niche networks? For example, faith-based podcasts to faith-based networks, or can general pod networks be an asset to a niche podcaster? I know it was a mouthful. If I need to read it again, I can.
No, I'll jump in there. I think much like we had just said, I think it's both. I think you may have a better opportunity to get part of that niche network, but I think there's still a value to being that niche podcast on a larger network. So I don't think it's an either or. I think, you should be looking at both, but understanding, as Tiffany has said many times, understanding your value, understanding what you bring to the table. And if you are going to go to that network that is faith-based, do you bring something different than those other shows on that network? Or are you just regurgitating the same information? Are you, just go the low-hanging fruit here, are you the Black podcast on that, that faith-based network? Are you bringing to them, a AME perspective on faith-based? So understand that even when you go to something that has a niche, there's also those sub niches as well, and you should make sure that you're filling a void for them.
Yeah, and I would say if you're going to the larger ones, to the general ones, what's your angle? Like, other than you just being a faith-based podcast and them being general, does their roster show that this is a need that they have? Or can you prove to them that this is a need that they want? So there's nothing wrong with trying, but if you're going to shoot for that, just make sure your angle and your why is on point. And there's nothing wrong with looking at their roster, listening to what they have so far, and even maybe just having conversations with people that work there if you can. If you can get 15 minutes, what's wrong with a 15-minute informational with a producer of one of the shows at this general network? Because you may find out that this is not a place that you want to be. So sometimes all people see is the name, and then they aspire to the name, but they know nothing about what the culture is like. They know nothing about what it's like to be a part of that roster. So before you shoot for that platform or that company, just do your homework. That's all. Just do your homework.
All right, so we're down to like the last 7 minutes. So I want to make sure I give you guys an opportunity to tell people how they can find you, how they can connect with you before we close out. While they're doing that, if anybody has any other questions, put it in Q&A, and if we have time, we'll try to jump in and answer it. But if not, so sorry.
You can find, I don't follow me, I'm boring. Follow my company at DCP Official. DCP Entertainment is the name of the company, but on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at DCP Official. And we have a lot of great shows, but now I'll plug the one that I do. Say Their Name is the one that we're really trying to push right now. Again, all around unarmed Black people being killed by police and in stand your ground states, handing that microphone over to the families so they can give their perspective, not only on the situation itself and the aftermath, but also who were these people as human beings. I think that's extremely important in what we're trying to do. And also to mention that we have a crowdfunding along with this series where we're trying to raise 100% of these proceeds going directly to these families to help them with medical bills and legal fees. And honestly, some of these people still live in the same homes that their loved one was killed in. So to hopefully get them out of those situations. So I very much, want you people to go check out that series. But even if you don't listen to the series, if you can donate to that crowdfunding, and if you go to our website, DCP official.com, you can find that all the links for the podcast itself, as well as the crowdfunding.
So I would go support everything that Chris is doing. It sounds amazing. I've also go support everything that Anthony is doing. If you want to follow me, you can follow me at Miss Tiff Says. That's MISSTIFF That's everywhere: Twitter, Instagram, the website, all the things. The shows are Yes Girl, Unbossed, The Solve, The Color Files, and Magic Unfiltered, all through the Essence Podcast Network. So just listen, let us know what you think. And that's it.
Perfect. Likewise, Chris, I know he's been working really hard on this series. We was talking, months ago about it, and just to see it manifested, it's just amazing, man. So definitely want to support. I want to support. I want to continue to support, and can't wait to do so. I'm Anthony Frazier on all the same way you see it right here on Zoom, all together on all social media. But my company, ABF Creative, same thing. Twitter, Instagram, same thing. And as far as like shows, definitely go on abfc.co. That's our website. You can check out different shows that we have coming out. One show in particular that we're very interested in and people hearing is something that we're wrapping up right now called Raising the Game. It's a story of a engineer called Jerry Lawson. Jerry Lawson was one of the first Black video game creators. He created the video game cartridge. A lot of people don't know that a Black man was behind that innovation. And so we're telling his story, talking to all of his colleagues, including people that you might have heard of, who like Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Chuck E. Cheese and Atari and all these, he was even in the same computer club as Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, the homebrew computer club in California. But, all these different people have, gone on to do great things and blown up. But what happened? Like why wasn't his name known? I know we can all guess why, but we're going to tell a story and really get to the nitty gritty. So definitely be on the lookout on that, and that's going to be out on Audible.
Thank you guys so much. My name is Anna Agogo, founder of Black Pod Collective and Black Podfest. As always, we are always here to support you guys on your podcasting journey. If you're interested in becoming a member of the collective, you can go to BLK Collective. We also post a lot of content, a lot of educational resources on our Instagram. We have a how-to podcast for podcasters called Black Pod Collective, the podcast. And in January 2021, we will be launching a Pods Den, which is just industry news and industry insights from really our community's perspective. So do stay tuned for that. I'll be launching it with the founder of Caribbean Podcast Directory. But definitely thank you guys so much for staying this whole time and tuning in. Thank you to our amazing panelists for all the great information. And you guys have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank y'all so much.
Thank
This
you.
was awesome. This was so awesome. Thank y'all to everybody that has attended and stuck with us throughout these last 2 days or whatever. We done spent some hours together, and we deeply appreciate each and every one of y'all. Make sure that you go to the documents section and get all of your goodies from all of the sessions that you may or may not have attended. Get all of the good stuff that's being sent out there. And meet us in like a half a minute for the closing remarks session so that we can wrap it up and give y'all some more good information. All right. See y'all in a little bit.